The first thing I saw on the burn that morning was a werewolf crossing it at a distance of about 600 yards. It was moving fast, and its gait was wrong. Not hunting fast, fleeing fast. Its head was turned slightly back toward the country behind it, and it was not watching where it was running, and a werewolf in the North Maine Woods does not run from anything. The werewolf was enormous, even at 600 yards. Black fur silvered along the spine, shoulders I put at 6 feet from the ground, and its quadrupedal lope, muscle mass you simply do not see on anything else that lives in this hemisphere. It was the largest werewolf I had ever seen in 23 years of running fur in that country. And it was running like an animal that already knew the math was against it. Then I saw what was behind it. I saw the Wendigo come across the burn on 2 legs at a distance of about 200 yards behind the werewolf. And I'm going to describe it to you exactly the way I wrote it in the notebook that afternoon. Taller than the werewolf. Much taller. 9.5 feet was what I put down, and my hands were not steady when I wrote it. Skeletal thin. Arms and legs too long for the frame. Legs that bent the wrong way at the ankle, like a deer's hind legs put onto a human body. Skin the color of wet birch bark, pale gray, white, stretched tight over the bones underneath, and it could see the shape of its ribs from 600 yards away. Its head was smaller than its body should have carried, and longer than the skull beneath it. It was running on 2 legs, but every few strides it pushed off the snow with its hands, the way a gorilla knuckle walks but faster and longer, strided. And no vapor came off it. None. At -18, with the werewolf ahead of it throwing a cloud of breath, you could see from a mile out. The Wendigo did not breathe. I had to lower the camera because my hands had stopped working. I had spent 4 months absolutely certain that the thing hunting the werewolves in my country was a Bigfoot. I had the tracks. I had the kill sites. I had a theory. I had been wrong in a way I am still trying to live with. What I saw on that ridge that morning was not a Bigfoot. What I saw on that ridge that morning is the reason I am telling you any of this. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments where in the country you are watching from. Tonight, I am going to walk you through the winters of 2017 and 2018 and what I found on my fur line in the North Maine Woods, and why the werewolves in that country are not the top of the food chain anymore. The first thing you should understand about where this happened is the scale of it. The North Maine Woods is 3.5 million acres of privately owned commercial timberland. It is more roadless country than most of the western wilderness areas. The gates are locked to the public for most of the year, and if you do not have a permission slip from the landowner, you do not legally set foot on most of it. My line runs about 300 miles through leased permission in the St. John River drainage, west of the Allagash. I winter alone out of a tar, paper cabin on a tributary I am not going to name in this video, because the country I am describing is still there, and I would rather nobody else go looking for it on a weekend. I am a licensed Maine trapper and a registered master guide. I grew up on this land. My father was a Maine game warden. My grandfather ran fur in the same drainages I work now, back in the 1950s, when there were officially no wolves in Maine at all, and he was quietly telling anybody who asked that there were plenty and always had been. I did not personally believe in werewolves until 2009. I had heard stories my whole life, and I had always set them aside as the kind of thing men tell each other at deer camp after the third drink. Then I saw one at 60 yards in full daylight on a frozen bog south of Churchill Lake, and I lost the ability to set the stories aside. I am not going to tell that story in this video because it is a different story and it deserves its own telling. What you need to know for tonight is that from 2009 onward, I ran my line with different eyes. I learned what werewolves do in this country. I learned the difference between a werewolf kill and a black bear kill. I learned their territory markers. I personally think the thing most people get wrong about werewolves is the drama. A werewolf is a predator. Predators are not rheumatic. They are practical. A werewolf in the Maine woods hunts moose calves in the spring, lone deer in the fall, and it avoids humans who know enough to avoid it back. 8 winters of mine were spent on that understanding, and nothing ever happened to break it. The werewolves shared a country. They ate what they ate. I trapped what I trapped. I left the drainages where I knew a werewolf pack was denning, and they, in turn, did not come near the cabin or the line. That arrangement worked, because the werewolves in the North Maine Woods had nothing to be afraid of. They were the top of the food chain. Nothing in that country challenged them. That is the single most important fact for everything I am about to tell you, and it is the fact that stopped being true. The first crack in it came in the spring of 2017. I was walking a mud flat near Churchill Lake, checking for beaver sign, and I found a fresh werewolf print in soft clay. Clean, unmistakable, the long stride and the claw placement. I had seen hundreds like it. Crossing that werewolf track at an angle was a second set of prints. Bigger, longer stride than the werewolf by at least 1.5 feet. No visible claws. The footprint itself was narrow and elongated, not broad the way a Bigfoot is supposed to be in any account I had ever read. I photographed both tracks, and I did not go back to that drainage for the rest of the season. I told myself I was being careful. I was not being careful. I was being afraid, and I was refusing to name what I was afraid of, and that is how you miss the early warnings on something like this. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I had the information in my hands in May of 2017, and I put it in a drawer and waited for October. Late October 2017. Snow, already on the ground at elevation, the first hard freeze, locking up the shallows. I was checking the north end of my line on the St. John drainage, about 9 miles in from the nearest logging road, running coyote sets in a spruce flat I had trapped for 15 straight winters. I came up on the set from downwind, which is habit, and the first thing I noticed was that the trap was sprung and empty. That by itself is normal. A coyote pops a set and runs more often than a trapper likes to admit. The second thing I noticed was the smell. wet fur and blood, and underneath that, something chemical and cold that I could not place. Like rust, or like old copper. 10 feet from the trap, lying on its side in the snow, was a werewolf, still partly in transition. Fur heavy along the spine, hands longer than a man's hands should ever be, jaw elongated but not fully set. I have skinned black bears that would not have come up to this werewolf's chest lying down, and the werewolf was fully grown, and the werewolf was dead. I am going to be careful about the condition of the werewolf because this is not that kind of channel. What I will tell you is that whatever had killed it had come from above and behind, between the shoulder blades, and had done the work in a single strike. There were no drag marks leaving the scene. There was no sign of a fight. It had not seen the killing blow coming. I stood there for probably 20 minutes trying to make the evidence add up to something I had a name for. Wolverine does not work. Wrong scale, wrong pattern, and wolverines have not had numbers in Maine for a long time anyway. Bear does not work. Wrong season, wrong approach, wrong kill style. Another werewolf does not work. Werewolves kill each other through the throat and the belly, not the back. I photographed the carcass, took hair samples, marked the coordinates in my notebook, and left without resetting the trap. I told nobody. I am not going to be the Maine trapper who calls the warden service to report a werewolf body on his line. That is a conversation that ends with me losing my guide license and my landowner permission, and I had no way to prove what I had found anyway. 3 weeks later, I found the second one, 12 miles northwest of the first, in a drainage I only run every 10 days. This one was older, frozen through, partly scavenged by ravens and fisher. The killing wound was identical. Same entry point between the shoulder blades, same single strike, same absence of a struggle in the snow around the body. That was when I started paying real attention. I adjusted my line, I shifted my schedule, I began checking sets I had let go cold for weeks. Over the next 6 weeks, I found 3 more werewolf carcasses. That brought the count to 5. I sat at the cabin on a dead, still December night, with the topographic maps laid out on the table, and I put all 5 kills on the map. The kills traced a rough oval, about 40 miles on the long axis, centered on a section of burn country from the 1977 North Maine Woods fires that had grown back as dense regenerating spruce. Anybody who has trapped northern Maine knows that burn. It is thick. It is trackless. It is exactly the kind of cover a werewolf pack would choose to den in. And something was working it from the outside in. The tracks around the kill sites were the same tracks I had photographed by Churchill Lake in the spring. Long stride, narrow elongated foot, no visible claws in the print. And now, looking at them with 6 months of context, I could see that whatever was making them was moving through this country faster than any animal I had a file for, in a straight line through ground I would have needed snowshoes to cover. There were also marks on the nearby trees. Deep gouges in the bark at heights I initially refused to believe I was reading correctly. 9 feet, 10 feet. One of them had what I measured with my own tape to be 11 feet 2 inches off the ground. I was not looking at a bear. I was not looking at a moose. I was looking at something I did not have a file for. The first assumption I landed on was Bigfoot. I want to be honest about that because it is part of how I understand what I got wrong. I knew the Pacific Northwest accounts. I knew there was a scattered Maine Bigfoot tradition up around Moosehead Lake and down through the old 1970s, reports out of the Allagash. I knew the tradition was thin, and I believed it anyway, because I needed to believe something. I spent 4 months absolutely certain I was tracking a Bigfoot preying on werewolves. Everything I thought I knew pointed that way. The height, the stride, the strength required to kill a full-grown werewolf in a single strike. The absence of any firearm sign on the kills. I want to say this plainly because it matters. I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that took me a long time to understand. I remember being almost excited. A Bigfoot that hunts werewolves would have been the story of a lifetime. I started planning how I might photograph one. I started carrying a real camera alongside my line gear, wrapped in a wool sock inside my coat to keep the shutter from freezing. I was 23 years into this work, and I thought I was about to see something nobody had ever documented. The winter of 2017 into 2018 is the hardest part of this story to talk about because it is the winter I lost my territory without knowing I was losing it. I'm going to tell you 3 specific things that happened that winter. I am not going to dress them up. I am going to tell them the way I wrote them down in the notebook at the time. The first one happened in mid-December. I was sitting in a portable tree stand about 14 feet up on a ridge above a frozen beaver flowage, waiting at last light. I had found a werewolf print in the inlet 3 days earlier, and I was hoping to see what was coming in to check the drainage. I had been sitting motionless for over an hour when the footsteps started. I heard something walking on 2 legs through dry hardwood leaves directly below me. Deliberate, unhurried, not bothering to conceal itself at all. The footsteps came from the east side of the flowage, crossed under the stand, and stopped. And then they did not move again for what I later calculated was 19 minutes. I did not look down. I did not move. I have been in tree stands with black bears underneath me. I have been in tree stands with moose walking through underneath me. This was not either of those things. The quality of the stillness underneath me was different, and my body knew it before my head did. And for those 19 minutes, I was not a man sitting in a stand. I was prey holding its breath. When the footsteps left, they left the same way they had come in, unhurried, walking in a straight line east until I could not hear them anymore. I waited another 40 minutes before I climbed down. When I got to the base of the stand, there were no tracks in the leaves. None. The leaves were undisturbed, but the smell was there. Wet fur and that chemical rust, and copper smell underneath it. The second thing happened in early January, pre-dawn, and it was the moment I stopped being able to tell myself this was just a large animal I had not cataloged yet. I was walking into a set on snowshoes in the gray hour before the light came up. From my left, about a quarter mile into a black spruce flat, I heard a werewolf vocalization. It was the long, low call werewolves use to locate each other in heavy cover. I have heard that call probably 30 times in my career. It does not frighten me. It is a working sound, the way a wolf howl is a working sound. I stopped on the trail and I listened for the answering call from the rest of the pack, because a werewolf rarely calls alone. What answered it did not come from the direction a werewolf pack should have been. It came from my right, much closer to the trail, and it was not any call I could place. The nearest I can describe it as halfway between a white-tailed doe's distress bleat and a man trying to imitate that bleat badly, in the wrong pitch and from the wrong kind of throat. The werewolf call did not repeat. Whatever had made the answering sound was now standing between me and my truck. I stood in the trail for a long time trying to decide whether to go forward or go back. In the end, I went forward, because I thought forward had better cover. I walked past the set I had come in to check. I did not stop. I kept walking until it was full daylight. The third thing happened in late January, and it is the thing I cannot explain to anybody in a way that makes them believe me. I came up on a werewolf carcass that had been hauled 20 feet up into the crotch of a dead white pine, the way a leopard caches a kill in Africa, 20 feet straight up into a tree. I want you to sit with that for a second. A fully grown male werewolf in physical maturity weighs at a minimum 400 pounds. I have handled enough bear carcasses over the years to have a working sense of dead weight, and a dead werewolf is heavier than a live one, because nothing in the body is cooperating with you. Nothing in Maine can lift 400 pounds of dead weight 20 feet straight up into a tree. Not a black bear, not anything on the species list. And yet there it was. After the cache, I stopped sleeping through the night at the cabin. I want to be clear about this, because I think it matters for how the rest of the story lands. I was not scared in a way that made me jumpy. I was scared in a way that made me tired. That is a different kind of scared, and it is the kind that breaks a man down slowly without him noticing. The sounds around the cabin got worse through late January. Circling in the tree line, just beyond where the light from the windows would have reached. A knocking sound against one of the outer logs one night. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. At about 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, I still remember. And once, something that sounded like a person trying the door handle from the outside, slowly, with patience. I was a mile from the nearest road and 40 miles from the nearest person, and whatever was at my door was not a person. I stopped trapping the inner third of my line entirely after that. I told myself it was a precaution. It was not a precaution. I was being driven out of my own country, and I was not willing to say so out loud to myself yet, because saying it would have made it real. By early February, I had pulled my sets back to a ring about 12 miles wide around the cabin, and I was checking them in daylight only. I want to be clear about something before I go on. I was not looking for a story. I was not planning a video. I was a working trapper, losing the best country he had ever had. And I was trying to figure out what was happening to me and to my country. That was when I decided I needed to ask somebody who might actually know. I could not ask another trapper because another trapper would tell me I had been drinking. I could not ask a game warden because a warden would tell me the same thing and also start looking at my records. There was one person I could think of, and I had not spoken to him in 20 years. My father had known a Penobscot elder decades back through some work they had done together on a poaching case in the 1980s. The elder was still alive in his late 80s, living on Indian Island down on the Penobscot River. I drove south on a gray morning in early February and asked to be allowed to see him, and he agreed to see me. Indian Island sits in the middle of the Penobscot River, just above Old Town. It is the seat of the Penobscot Nation, and it is a long drive from the North Maine Woods through a lot of country, and it had most of a day to sit with what I was going to say to a man I had not seen since I was a teenager and had no real right to be asking anything from. The elder's house was small and quiet and warm. In a way, my cabin had stopped being warm. I sat in his kitchen, and I told him what had been happening on my line. I told him about the carcasses and the tracks and the cache 20 feet up in the white pine. I told him about the thing under the stand, and the call in the spruce flat, and the door handle. He listened all the way through without asking a single question. I am not going to put words in his mouth in this video, and I am not going to pretend I remember exactly how he phrased things, because I do not, and because the specific words were his and not mine to give out. I am going to tell you what he told me, as cleanly as I can. The first thing he asked me when I was finished was whether I had ever noticed, on any of the werewolf kill sites, a patch of ground where the snow had melted and refrozen in a rough circle. I had noticed that on 3 of the 5 kills. I had written it in the notebook. I had assumed it was from the carcass cooling unevenly, and I had not thought it was worth mentioning. I told him yes. 3 of them. I showed him the notebook entry. He looked at it for a long time, and he did not speak while he looked at it. Then he told me what was hunting in my country. The word he used was a word I had heard in scattered contexts my whole life, and never once applied to anything I thought was real. Wendigo. I want to be careful here because I am not an authority on Penobscot religion, and I have no right to be one. What I am going to tell you now is what a man whose family has lived on that land for 1,000 years longer than mine told me in his own kitchen, and nothing more than that. I am going to try to get it right. The first thing he told me that what I had been tracking was not a Bigfoot. He was specific about this. He said the forest beings in the Algonquian traditions of the Northeast are real and do exist in the old stories. under different names than Bigfoot, and they are not what I had been following. He said those beings are watchers. They are part of the woods. The thing on my line was not that. The Wendigo, he told me, is something else entirely. The Wendigo is a hunger that took a shape. It is tall, and it is thin, and it is always starving, no matter what it eats, and what it prefers to eat is whatever is strongest in its range, because strength is a kind of life, and the Wendigo consumes life the way a fire consumes wood. In the country I was trapping, he said, the strongest thing was not the moose. It was not the bear. It was not the Canada wolves drifting down from New Brunswick. The strongest thing in that country was the werewolves, and that was why the Wendigo was eating them. That was why the werewolves were running. That was why the pack had pulled back from the burn. He told me the melted circles in the snow were where the Wendigo had stood over its kills. He said he did not know why the ground warmed under it. He said the old people had noticed it and had no explanation either. They had simply written it down in memory, the way they wrote everything down, and the memory had been passed to him, and now he was passing it to me. Then he told me the third thing, and the third thing is the reason I drove home in silence. He told me the Wendigo was already aware of me. It had been aware of me for months. The fact that I was still alive was a decision the Wendigo had made, and Wendigos, he said, change their minds. He told me the correct response was to leave the country and not go back. I do not think I can describe what it is like to be told something like that by somebody who has no reason to lie to you. I had driven south that morning, hoping he would tell me I was being paranoid. He had told me instead that I was exactly as scared as I should be, and possibly not scared enough, and that the thing in my country had a name his people had been using longer than my country had existed. I left Indian Island in the late afternoon and drove north in silence. I remember the drive as the loneliest one of my life. I was trying to decide whether to walk away from the country entirely, pull the remaining traps, pack up the cabin, take the season as a loss, or to go back in one more time to see for myself. I thought about it the whole drive home. I want to tell you why I went back in, because it is important, and I do not want anybody to think it was bravery. It was not bravery. It was 23 years of reading a piece of country and understanding it better than I understood anything else in my life. Something had been rewriting the rules underneath me, and I needed to see it with my own eyes, or I was going to spend the rest of my life wondering. I chose a specific spot, a limestone ridge on the west side of the burn country, right at the center of the kill oval. The ridge was high enough to give me clean sight lines across the regenerating spruce below, and the wind up there in February runs consistent west to east, which meant if it came in from the south, I would be downwind of most of the burn the whole time. I went in at 3 in the morning on snowshoes. It was February 12th, 2018. I want you to know the date, because it is the date on the notebook page, and I still have the notebook page, and I still pull it out sometimes and look at it when I am trying to remind myself I did not imagine any of this. The temperature at the cabin before I left was -21. By the time I reached the ridge and set the blind, it was -18 and the sky was clear. I built a cold blind in a windfall at the top of the ridge. A cold blind is exactly what it sounds like. No fire, no heater, no scent. I got into the blind well before first light, and I waited, and I kept the camera inside my coat to keep the shutter from freezing. I did not bring the rifle. The elder had told me the rifle would not matter, and somewhere on the drive north from Indian Island, I had decided to believe him about that too. Sunrise over the North Maine Woods in February is not the pink and orange sunrise most people picture. It is gray and then paler gray and then a hard pale blue. And the cold during that transition is worse than the cold of full night, because your body knows the warmth is not coming. I watched the burn come out of the dark. The first thing I saw was the werewolf crossing it at a distance of about 600 yards. I have already told you what it looked like at the start of this video. I want to tell it to you again now, in order, because the order matters. The werewolf was enormous, and the werewolf was running, and a werewolf in that country does not run from anything. Its gait was wrong. Not hunting fast, fleeing fast. Its head was turned slightly back toward the country behind it, and it was not watching where it was running, and its front shoulders were rolling in a way that told me it had been running for a long time already, and it was starting to tire. Somewhere behind it, in the pale morning, was the reason. Then the Wendigo came across the burn behind it, 200 yards back, on two legs, 9.5 feet tall, if my eye could be trusted at that distance, and my eye may not have been trustworthy, but 9.5 feet is what I wrote in the notebook. Skeletal thin, arms and legs too long for the frame, skin the color of wet birch bark, stretched tight over the bones. The legs bent the wrong way at the ankle, the way a deer's hind legs bend, put onto a body shaped roughly like a man's. The head was too small for the body and too long for the skull beneath it. I need to be specific about something, because I know the pop culture Wendigo in the movies and the video games always has antlers. The thing I saw did not have antlers. I do not know where the antlers in the modern pictures came from. Somebody invented them somewhere along the line and everybody copied it. The thing I saw had no antlers and no horns, and the top of its skull was smooth and bare. I am telling you this because if you ever see one, you're going to be looking for antlers, and you are not going to see any, and you will hesitate. Do not hesitate. It was running on two legs, but every few strides, it pushed off the snow with its hands. The way a gorilla knuckle walks, but faster and longer, strided, and the movement was efficient in a way nothing built like that should have been, and no vapor came off it. None. At -18, with the werewolf ahead of it throwing a visible cloud of breath, the Wendigo did not breathe. I had been in the North Maine Woods on enough February mornings to know that no living thing moves through air that cold without its breath showing. Your breath shows whether you want it to or not. It is not something your body offers you as a choice. The Wendigo was not breathing, and that was the moment I lowered the camera, because my hands had stopped working inside the mittens. It closed the distance to the werewolf in a way I cannot describe in ordinary terms, So I am going to tell you exactly what I saw and let you sit with it. One moment, the Wendigo was 200 yards behind the werewolf. The next moment, it was on top of it. I did not see the steps in between. I do not know if there were steps in between. The werewolf went down on the burn, and I am not going to describe what happened next, because it is not what this video is for, and it is not what you came here to watch. What I will tell you is the sound of it, which was not loud. It was brief. And the silence that came after it was not like any silence I have ever been in on the North Maine Woods in 23 years. It was not quiet. It was actual silence. No wind. No ravens. The wind had been running west to east through the spruce all morning. And during that kill, the wind stopped. I am not going to try to explain that because I cannot explain it. I am telling you what I notice because I noticed it and because I wrote it down in the notebook when my hands were working again. Then the Wendigo stood over the werewolf, and it turned its head slowly, the way a heron turns its head on a pond when it is sorting through small movements in the reeds, until it was looking directly up the ridge at me, 600 yards, through a cold blind. At first light in February, and I am not going to pretend I cannot say this for certain, because I can. It saw me. I do not remember leaving the ridge. My next clear memory is being back at my truck, 3.5 miles south, with the camera still in my pack and one of my snowshoes missing a binding. I have no memory of covering that distance. 3.5 miles through deep snow, and I have no memory of any of it, and I have never gotten that memory back. I did not run my line again that winter. I finished the season on a salary job at a sporting camp on the Penobscot River, guiding ice fishing parties for people who wanted to catch toga on a lake they could drive to. I took the loss on the fur season. I did not tell the camp owner why I had come in off the line, and he knew enough not to ask. In the spring, I went back to the ridge for the camera. I wanted to see what was on the memory card. The camera was still in the cold blind where I had left it, buried in a foot of new snow. The body of the camera was undamaged. The memory card was seated correctly in its slot, and it was wiped, not corrupted. Wiped. Every photo I had taken that winter was gone. Not just the morning on the ridge. The whole card, all the way back to October. I had taken the card out of the camera with my own hands that morning in February at the truck and sealed it in a waterproof case, and I had not formatted it or touched it since. It was wiped anyway, and I do not have an explanation for that, and I am not going to invent one. I went back to trapping the following winter, but only the southern third of my old territory. I have never gone back into the burn country. I have never run the St. John drainage above the confluence where I found the first carcass. I lost that country. I lost the best country I ever worked, and I lost it to something my people did not know was there. and I should have been listening to the people who did. I know what most of you are going to say about this story. I would say it too, if a man I had never met came to me with an account like this one 5 years ago. All I can tell you is that I am a trapper. I am not a storyteller. I do not have a reason to invent any of this. I lost my line. I lost my income for a full season. I lost the country. The thing I want to say about the Bigfoot part of this, because it is in the title, and because it matters, is that for 4 months, the word Bigfoot was almost a comfort to me. A Bigfoot was an animal. A Bigfoot was flesh and blood. A Bigfoot was something it could photograph and track and eventually find a pattern for and eventually understand. What I saw on that ridge was not a Bigfoot. I want to be clear about that for anybody who wants to take one piece of this video home with them. The thing hunting the werewolves in northern Maine is not a Bigfoot. Bigfoot, if Bigfoot exists in that country at all, is a watcher. What I saw was not a watcher. What I saw was a hunter, and it was hunting the apex predators of the North Maine Woods, and it was winning. I live in a different part of the state now. I stand on the porch on winter nights, and I listen to the wind coming off the trees. And I know the difference between the wind and something walking. On the coldest nights, I sometimes hear what might be footsteps in the yard. I do not go to the window. I have not heard a werewolf call in 3 years, and I know what that probably means. If any of you are trappers or guides or wardens working the North Maine Woods and you have seen what I am describing, or you found one of the kills, or you have photographs from an angle I have not shown you, I would like to hear from you. Leave it in the comments. Let me know where you are watching from. And if this is the first time you're hearing about any of this, please do not go looking for it. I do not know if the Wendigo followed me out of the North Maine Woods. I do not think I will ever know for certain. What I know is that the country I worked for 23 years does not belong to the werewolves anymore, and it does not belong to me. And the elder on Inhated Island was trying to tell me something I did not want to hear, which is that it never really belonged to either of us in the first place.